Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, back with my LCK Week 3 review, analysis, and power rankings. I want to start this video off just by saying thank you to all of those in the comment section who wished me well. I was sick all of last week, so I appreciate all the well wishes. My voice should sound a lot better now, or at least that's the hope. So that's good, but again, thank you so much for everybody who said that in the comment section below. I don't want to waste too much time, because like usual, the LCK is a very long week, so I want to jump right into our first series of day one, and that is going to be Hanwha Liiv Esports taking on Fredit BRION, and a pretty easy 2-0 win here for Hanwha. Hanwha looks like a really, really good team. I talked about this last week a little bit. They look like one of the two best teams in Korea right now. They're going to get a chance to prove that later in the week, but we'll get to that. They looked really, really, really good here. So Arthur is going to be my player of the series here. He has been one of the most pleasant surprises of the entire season so far. I didn't really have any high expectations for Arthur, coming in, of course, from the OPL, from Direwolves, but he comes in here and he looks like a top half jungler here in the LCK, one of the toughest leagues for junglers in the world, if not the toughest, and he looks fantastic. He looks really, really good. That Pantheon game especially was really dominant. Of course, Pantheon, I think, is just an overpowered pick right now in general, but you know, he looked good on it nonetheless. We still should commend him when he does look good. Everybody on this team actually looked rather good. It was kind of just an easy win here. BRION, obviously not the toughest competition. They are what I projected the worst team in the league, what I think most people have as the worst team in the league. is going to be my dud of the series here. Just didn't look that good, especially on the Olaf in game one. Really wasn't what you wanted to see. Got out jungled by Arthur quite significantly. We are going to see Chieftain later in the week, but only for one game, so, you know, it's hard to tell. has these high highs and these low lows from what we've seen from him so far this year. I don't think that's really going to change. He just seems like an inconsistent player, so. Other than that, both of these teams kind of played as expected. Chovy outplayed Lava, Deft outplayed Henna, Morgan outplayed Hoya. There's really just not a lot to talk about here. Vista is still kind of the weakness for this team, but he's kind of coming into his own. He's actually playing a lot more supports now, which is good. We saw him playing the Thresh in game 2 here, which is a good sign. He's just kind of been playing the Gragas, the Galio, the, you know, the more, let's say, experimental supports for most of the year. So it's really, really good to see him pull out the Thresh here in game 2 and look pretty good on it with the Vayne. So overall, Hanwha looks good. Fredit looks bad. Not really a shock here, but a decent game 1 here. Moving on to our second series of day 1, and that is what a lot of people had tabbed as one of the matches of the week, and that is Damwon Gaming taking on Gen G. There are a lot of people out there that have these two as the top two teams in the region. It's hard to complain with that. I personally don't. I have Hanwha Liiv up there in that second spot, but these two teams have been very, very strong to start the year. Damwon's loss to Fredit BRION notwithstanding, but both of them have been incredibly good to start the year here. And this series was no different. It was a very, very back and forth one. Game 1 was very fun to watch. Damwon Gaming, by the way, does take the series 2-1 here in a very, very fun series. Game 1 went 52 minutes. It was a very, very fun one. Damwon actually won having the kill loss there, which is something you don't often see. But, you know, I think they looked good. You know, it's tough to say, fuck! That's going to go ahead and bring us into our second series of day 1, and that was what a lot of people had tabbed as one of the series of the week, and that is Damwon Gaming taking on Gen G. There are a lot of people out there that have these two as the two best teams in Korea. It's really hard to argue with them, and while I may not share that opinion, I can definitely see where they're coming from. This is a massive series, and a very big win here for Damwon. They do pick up the series win here 2-1. Very, very close, especially game 1. Gen G does come up narrowly with that victory in game 1 here. DK is going to pick up the final 2 games, however, in a little bit more convincing fashion. They looked like the better team, definitely in both of the last 2 games. One thing to note, there was a small roster change for Gen G this week. Klid is out, Flawless is in. It's to be determined, I guess, whether this is an upgrade or not. Klid has not had the best start to the year, but I do think Klid is a better player than Flawless. It's interesting to see if they're going in this direction, and it'll be interesting to see if they continue to do it. My player of the series here is going to be Canyon. on Damwon. He just looked very, very solid here. He looked very good on the Talia and the Udyr, especially in Game 2 and 3. People know I'm not the biggest fan of Udyr, but I will call out when people play well on it. He looks like he's getting back into form here. That was something that was definitely a worry for him. He hadn't had the most explosive starts of the year. Not that he was bad, just that he didn't seem like this overwhelming best jungler in the world like he was last year. He kind of proved that in this game, that he definitely still has that. Ghost played really well as well. This bot lane's actually been steadily very consistent. I like what I see there. The solo laners have been good as well. Khan, I think, is hit or miss. I thought he was really, really good in Game 1 on that Gnar. Coming very, very close to being my player of the series here, but just couldn't quite bring it home. I'm a little bit worried about his champion pool. He plays a lot of Gnar, and then when he's not on the Gnar, he's pretty much exclusively on the aggressive picks. You don't see a lot of Renekton. You don't see a lot of Aatrox from Khan. I'm not sure if it's really in his arsenal. It'll be interesting to see. My dud of the series here is going to be Rascal in the top lane. He had a pretty decent Game 1 on the Quinn. However, the last 2 games in this series, he was definitely the weakness for his team on the Scion and on the Gragas. Rascal looks like one of these players that, he had a fantastic start to the year, mostly because he looks really, really good when he can be that aggressor. When he gets a lead, he does a very good job of extending that lead. He does a very good job of playing off his jungler as well. But he's not the best from behind. He's not the best in a passive sense, which is, take that, with what you will, but he's going to be my dud of the series here for his Scion and his Gragas games. As for the outlooks of these two teams, it'll be interesting to see where Gen G goes with the Flawless Clid thing. Flawless actually plays both series this week, so we'll talk about that, but he didn't look too tremendously bad here. He just didn't necessarily impress. He has the first 0-0-0 game of the split in Game 2 here on Udyr, which, a champion that gets nothing done, it's quite appropriate. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see where Gen G goes. I still think they're a top team. Obviously, losing to Damwon isn't too big of a loss, but as for Damwon, they're the best team in Korea. They are still trying to make that case for the best team in the world. Fredit BRION series notwithstanding. So, it'll be interesting to see if they can continue that momentum. That's going to go ahead and bring us to Day 2, and our first series of Day 2 is going to be DRX taking on KT Rolster, and what was a battle of the two teams that are overperforming probably the most so far this year. This one does go to KT Rolster in a 2-0 sweep here. A very, very good look for KT. Kind of a weird look for DRX because this series was essentially the exact opposite of what we had seen from them so far this year. Up to this point, they had been a team that struggled to get leads early, but managed to stay in games through clever positioning, good macro, and late game team fighting. In this one, DRX was actually able to get a lot of early leads. Actually, in both games, they had quite a sizable lead. And in both games, they couldn't hang on to it, which is not exactly what you wanted to see. Obviously, this is a young team, so we can't take that with, too much of a surprise just because, young teams do throw leads in League of Legends. That's what we've seen over the past many, many years. But it's just kind of interesting to see the dynamic of this team shift so much from the first couple weeks to this one. My player of the series is going to be Ucal in the mid lane. He looked very, very good. He played the Azir and the Victor here. The Azir, especially in Game 1, was very strong. He was a big reason why this team was able to grab that lead back. His team fighting was very, very solid. He has been very good to start the year. He's definitely been the best member of this KT Rolster roster, and I expect that to continue. I think Ucal is one of those players who, once he gets on a roll, he continues to kind of roll down the hill over and over again, so it's good to see him do that here. My dud of the series is going to go to Kingin in the top lane. I have been very critical of Kingin all year so far, as well as last year on BLG. He did not show up in this series. He picks that Rumble into the Gnar in Game 1 because of the Nocturne mid kind of big flex thing they have going on here. Did not look good on the Rumble. It's not a pick I expect them to go back to. He looked pretty outclassed by Doran. I think this entire team just kind of looked meh. The solo lanes especially, I thought, were the weakness here. Kingin and Solka didn't exactly hold up their end of the bargain. I think this bot lane is slowly getting better. I don't think they're quite there yet. I'm a big fan of Pioshik, so I may be biased there, but I like Pioshik a lot. Either way, I think DRX, it's really interesting to see the dichotomy, like I said, of them going from this late game team to, throwing late game leads. I think they could use a lot of seasoning. Do I think they're still a playoff team? Maybe. We're going to talk about that, you know, from 5 to like 8. It's like basically the same. It's completely irrelevant, you know, what position you guys have them in 5 to 8. They're all the same skill level. So a loss like this is going to hurt because it's to a team that you're fighting for a playoff spot with, but, you know, hopefully they can turn it around. As for KT, they continue their role here. They did take down T1 last week. They continue here against DRX. A very solid win. This team is proving that they are better than expectations definitely predicted. I did not have a lot of hope for this KT Rolster roster, but they do look a lot better than I gave them credit for. It definitely looks like they are a playoff team right now. It's just a matter of can they hold on to that. Next up, our second series of day 2, and that is T1 taking on Liiv SANDBOX in a 2-0 series sweep here for T1. This is exactly what they needed after looking very, very rough in the first couple weeks here. It is worth noting that this is almost an entirely different roster here for T1. Elim is out, Faker is out, and Gumayushi is out. Cuz, Closer, and Teddy are in here, so they're going with a little bit more experience here with Cuz and Teddy coming back into the roster. They looked better here. I'm not going to say this is the best lineup possible, but I do think they looked fine. I actually thought Elim had a pretty good start to the year, so did Gumayushi, but, you know, I understand wanting to play with the formula a little bit, especially if you aren't winning. This is exactly what you needed. Like I said, you were losing a lot. Cuz is actually going to be my player of the series. I got a lot of flack for saying how high I was on Cuz in my preseason predictions. I think Cuz and Elim are probably two of the best junglers in the league. They just both happen to be here on this T1 roster. Cuz kind of showed that off in this series. I know SANDBOX isn't the most dominant team to go up against, but he did show off a lot of what he can do well, especially on that Udyr in Game 2. My dud of the series is going to be Kroko here for SANDBOX. He just did not look very good. He got absolutely destroyed in Game 1 on that Udyr. And then he honestly, he got one of the strongest, if not the strongest pick in the meta right now in the Pantheon and was able to do pretty much nothing with it in Game 2, constantly getting caught out. So Kroko is going to be my dud of the series here. He's had a decent start to the year, but definitely some inconsistency showing. He's going to play that aggressive style, and if it doesn't work, he's going to look pretty bad, which is kind of what we saw here. As for the outlooks of these two teams, like I said, T1 just needs to figure out what they're going to do. This is good. This is a good direction. I think I'm usually pretty hypercritical of not giving players time to develop synergy, but when you do bulk changes like this, you know, you take out multiple members. I imagine Cuz, Closer, and Teddy have been practicing a lot in scrims. The same thing with Elim, Faker, and Gumayushi. So it's kind of like you're doing pairs. So they are developing the chemistry. You're just picking the pair that you think is best here. As for drafts, we saw some interesting things. The Nico support is kind of the big one here from KIA. He looks really, really good on it. Nico actually looks like a pretty dominant pick into that Tahm Kench from Effort. I believe that's the first Tahm Kench globally here so far. You know, I'm not excited for him to be back, but we're not seeing much of him, so it's not too big of a deal. Either way, really, really interesting stuff here. As for SANDBOX, they don't look to be very good. They look to be one of the bottom 2 to 3 teams in the league, which is sad to see, but it just doesn't look like they have the talent here. Fate and Summit have really taken steps back. Fate has been good this year. Summit has just really not been the Summit that we knew. He's kind of fallen off into one of the more mediocre top laners in the league, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's good to see T1 looking good at the very least. Moving into day 3, and our first series of day 3 here in week 3 is Nongshim RedForce taking on Afreeca Freecs in a 2-0 very, very solid win here for the Afreeca Freecs. This is a team I've been very hypercritical on in the first couple weeks, especially their macro, which has just looked, quite frankly, bad. I don't really know how else to put that, but quite frankly, they have looked lost, especially towards the end of games. And that's not entirely different here, but you know, it works out here. The 2-0 win, both games were incredibly close. If you actually see, both games had equal kills, 12-12 in the first game and 17-17 in the second game. Very, very rarely do you see that. It was more so just the weaknesses of one team were stronger than the weaknesses of the other. My player of the series here is going to go to Dread, and Dread is actually going to quite easily be my player of the week here. We're going to talk about him a little bit more later, but Dread was fantastic this week. I've actually been very critical of Dread to start the year. but he has looked very, very good here in this week. He obliterated Peanut, who is one of the better junglers in the league for most of these games. Get him on the Olaf pick. It's something that he looks incredibly comfortable on. He just looked better, I think, than he has looked all year long, and probably even last year as well. This was probably his best week so far. My dud of the series is going to go to Rich once again. This is someone that I have been very, very critical on as well throughout the start of this year. I think there's very good pieces on this Nongshim RedForce team. Most specifically, I think this bot lane is stepping up in a big way. However, the weaknesses in Rich and Bay, I think, have been really, really strong. Bay, I think, like I said last week, is kind of settling in to his role here in the mid lane. Rich is not, however. This is a guy who has continued to get worse throughout the year. And I'd be very concerned if I was a Nongshim fan here, because there's just, it's not a lot. It's not a very comforting thing to see when all your players just get, progressively worse. I think Peanut's kind of been on that as well. I think that's mostly due to team, though, with him playing those more aggressive picks. But Rich is going to be my dud of the series here. As for the outlooks of these two teams, Afreeca looks very, very good here. This is exactly what you needed to see. A solid win here to kind of bring back a little bit of confidence. It's not the most comforting win in the world, mostly because the games were so close. But Nongshim's not a terrible team, so it's good to pick up wins over them. As for Nongshim, Afreeca is a game that you need to win here. They didn't end up winning, which is unfortunate. This is a team that I actually had pretty high. I think I had them 5th in my preseason power rankings. That looks to be a little bit too high here. I believed in the Peanut and bot lane combination. I thought Rich was going to get better. Not all of that has come together. I will say this bot lane has been pleasantly a surprise here. I think Dekdom and Kellen have worked together rather well, and they've definitely been the bright spot for this team. So at least there's something to look forward to moving forward. The drafts were a little bit interesting. The only big, whoa pick we saw Keen pick that Sylas in the first game. We know he plays the Sylas really, really well. I love him on these more aggressive picks, these more AP style, I'm going to bully you out kind of picks in the top lane here into the Gragas. It worked really, really well in that game 1. So not really much else to talk about. Good, really, really good for Afreeca to pick up this win. Next up, our second series here of day 3, and that is going to be what my series of the week was here. Maybe not in gameplay, but definitely in ramification in terms of these standings, and that is Damwon Gaming taking on Hanwha Life Esports here, and what was a very convincing 2-0 win here for Damwon. This is exactly what you needed to see in order to build confidence back up in Damwon. They looked very, very solid in this series here. In game 1, it was a little bit more back and forth than game 2. Hanwha actually had a pretty decent lead in game 1, but Damwon is just too good. They fight back quite consistently. And then game 2 was rather dominant here for Damwon. My player of the series is going to be Showmaker there in the mid lane. We've always known that Showmaker shows up more so against good teams and most especially good mid laners rather than the lower tiered ones. And that's actually been proven quite true this year. It's probably his best series of the year here, and it is against what I have as the best mid laner of the year so far in Chovy. So very, very good to see that out of Showmaker. He definitely steps up for those big games. People might be shocked to see this, but my dud of the series is going to be Beryl in the support position. This is mostly for that game 1 on the Alistar, which I thought was probably the worst performance of any single player in the series. I just don't think anyone on Hanwha played especially bad. You had Juju there in the top lane, which, is fine. I think Morgan is a better player, but Juju is someone that they're splitting time, so it's fine to see that. I think you could have given this to Arthur as well, but I thought his Udyr game in game 1 was quite good. He did not have the best showing on the Pantheon, but I thought Beryl on the Alistar was a little bit worse. I will say Beryl did look much better on that Seraphine in game 2, so, it's interesting to point that out, but like I said, he had the worst single game performance, I think, of anybody. As for the drafts here, kind of just exactly what you want to see. Some interesting picks here. The Senna flex here from Hanwha, I think is something we're going to see a lot more. As we know, Vista does not like to play traditional supports, and that kind of continued in the series with the Gragas and then the Senna in game 2. They did flex that because in game 1, Deft did take that Senna into the bot lane. But it'll be interesting to see if they continue that moving forward. As for Damwon, you get caught on those more aggressive picks. He actually has a very, very similar champion pool to the Shy in the LPL. This Quinn, this Scion, these more aggressive picks that you want to win lane on, I think is what we're going to see out of Khan continuing moving forward. The Akali as well, if it's ever left up. But as for the direction these both teams are going in, I still think these are probably the two best teams in the region. Obviously, Hanwha didn't look nearly as good as Gen G did in the series here, but Hanwha looked pretty convincing in their win over Gen G last week. So Damwon really solidifying themselves as the best team in Korea and one of, if not the best team in the entire world. Definitely good to see and a confidence builder for this roster. That's going to bring us into day 4, second to last day of LCK action here in week 3, and that's kicked off with Fredit BRION taking on DRX in what was a very, very close series here. Not something you especially wanted to see. DRX is going to take the 2-1 series win, which is necessary. You have to beat up on these lower teams if you want to be considered a playoff team here, but not in the most convincing fashion, and definitely some concerns to look out for here. My player of the series is going to go to Kingen. In the top lane, he looked very bad in the first series of the week here against KT. He looked much better here, mostly because I think he's going up against a top jungle duo that is a lot more inexperienced. You put him on the Gnar, the Aatrox, these picks that are really, really hard to mess up, and you go into Gragas every single game, kind of getting that synergy down. He looked pretty good. Every game except game 2, that Fredit BRION win, which was probably the most dominant game of the series, that game 2 BRION win, but games 1 and 3 were decently close, with Kingen kind of being the driving light, especially in game 1 on that Gnar. My dud of the series, maybe surprisingly, is going to go to Pyosik in the jungle here. I just thought he was the worst performing member. This is back-to-back series where I actually gave the worst performing member to the team that won. I don't usually do this, but, I like to grade it as I see it. And as I saw it, I thought Pyosik was probably the weakest member of the game here. I think you could have given it to or Chieftain as well, but maybe not so much, mostly just because of that game 2 on the Taliyah, but I thought everybody looked good in game 2 for BRION. Like I said, Chieftain did go ahead and play game 1, and played games 2 and 3, so it's interesting to see that. I think looks a little bit better. I was calling for Chieftain. It's hard to tell. I think these two are very, very comparable. I think you can mix match, whichever one you want, but I think you just needed to pick one and develop synergy with them. As for the rest of the team, not really much to talk about with BRION. They look fine. I think this is one of Lava's best series outside of, Damwon, and this is one of Hoya's best series as well. However, I think this is one of the bot lane's worst series here for BRION. Henna and Delight have kind of been one of the more high points of this team, them and and they were kind of the weakness of this team in this series. But a good win here for DRX, something you absolutely have to pick up against these lower tier teams. BRION is definitely one of these lower tier teams, by the way. I don't think there's really much doubt about that now. Not the most convincing week here for DRX, but a win's a win. Next up, our second series of day 4 here, and that is going to be Liiv SANDBOX taking on Gen G, and what was a pretty good win here for Gen G, a 2-0 sweep. This was kind of an interesting series. Game 1 was not very, very close. A very interesting comp drafted by Gen G in Game 1. It's definitely something worth talking about here with the Akali Azir combo, solo laners, and the Olaf. I think this is fine. Usually, I'm not a huge fan of Azir in this meta specifically, but I think it works here. You have some early game pressure with Akali and Olaf, and especially not the Aphelios in the bot lane. I feel like every time Azir is picked, we get Aphelios in the bot lane. It's just something I don't really like to see, but I think adding something like a Xayah Leona, which has a lot more lane pressure, is better. My player of the series here is going to go to Liiv, the support for Gen G, not only because he brought out his trusty patented Jarvan support again, and won on it again. I believe he's 3-0 on that so far in 2021, but mostly for that, actually, the Leona game in Game 1. He was fantastic. The engages were near perfect. He really set his team up for success. I thought he was the best performing member, and he's actually been one of the best performing members in the LCK to start off 2021. I think he is absolutely in that MVP conversation. You're going to have to make the case on whether Rascal or Liiv has been the guy here for Gen G. I think Rascal definitely has been the more showy one, but I think Liiv, maybe, a little more under the radar, has kind of been the guy here for Gen G. As for SANDBOX, not the best showing. Leo is going to be my dud of the series here, and he's actually also going to be my dud of the week. Obviously, Leo replacing Route earlier in the year, they looked like they were winning a little bit more and more competitive with Leo, but his individual performance has been nothing shy of just bad. He did not look good on the Samira in Game 1. I get it. It's hard to go into Leona as Samira, but he looked even worse on the Xayah in Game 2. not too much to talk about there. Just a really, really bad series and a really bad week here for Leo. The outlooks of these two teams are kind of polar opposites. Gen.G is going to be at the top of that spectrum. The loss to Hanwha does kind of hurt them, but they looked competitive against DK earlier in the week, so it'll be interesting to see how much this team can put together, and if they can kind of recoup to be one of the top 2 teams in the league. I think at worst, they're definitely top 3, though. As for SANDBOX, I think it's the opposite. They are probably at best, bottom 3, I would say, 8th place, or something similar. I think more realistically, they are one of the bottom 2 teams here in the LCK. Not exactly what you wanted to see. Like I said, Summit has taken a major step back. Krakow is just too inconsistent. Fate has been good this year, but not good enough to carry this team into anything more than what they have gotten. I think this team is just kind of like discount KT Rolster right now, and that's not exactly what you wanted to see. So they're really, really going to have to turn it around if they want to do anything even remotely close to the playoffs. Finally, jumping into our final day here, day 5 of week 3 of the LCK. We are kicking that off with Afreeca Freecs taking on T1 in what was probably the best possible series you could see from Afreeca here. A 2-0 series sweep here for Afreeca. T1 is definitely in trouble, but we will get to them later. Like I said, Dread is easily my player of the week here. He looked phenomenal in this series. He looked great on the Olaf in Game 1. He looked great on the Graves in Game 2. He looked like the best player on the Rift in both games, which is, very, very good to see going up against a team that is as stacked as T1 is. Afreeca really, really needed this, not only because it's a 2-0 sweep here, and it caps off a very, very good week for them, but also because it's in the exact fashion that they needed it. This is a game, a series where they really kind of solidified the end. Game 1 was a little bit harder to close out, but they still closed it out really, really cleanly. They didn't give up any leads, and actually they were behind in Game 2 for a good portion of it and did climb back in, which is, really, really good to see because Afreeca has kind of been a very, very bad late game team so far this year. It's exactly what you wanted to see. So a very, very good series here for Afreeca. Big shout out to this bot lane. Fantastic in team fights. Fly was a great enabler. Keen was very, very good in the top lane as well. My dud of the series is going to go to Kana here on T1. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see which roster they roll with. They do go with the same one that they did earlier in the week against SANDBOX, but it does not work nearly as well. Kana was the big problem here. He did not look good, most specifically on that Gragas in Game 1. Although he got caught out a lot on that Akali in Game 2 as well. Obviously, he's known for, I want to say his more like mediocrely passive picks. Picks like the Gragas, I think, are right up his wheelhouse. So it's not too much of a shock to see him kind of get beat by Keen when he's on that Akali, but still kind of unfortunate to see that. We see the Pyke come out here from KIA, as well as the Pantheon support. I do want to point out, I actually really do like this Game 2 draft from T1. Not only do you take the Olaf, but you take the Pantheon as well, so you have control of the 2 strongest junglers in the meta right now, pretty much forcing Afreeca to go to something a little bit lower prio. They have to go to the Graves here, which is something that is quite bad, into the Olaf, and you get a very, very strong lane here in Kai'Sa Pantheon. They weren't able to make it work, however, Bang and Lehens were just better. So, interesting to see that, but not much to talk about when it comes to this T1 roster. It's going to be interesting to see which direction they go in, but I don't think this is it. I would, if it was me personally, I think I'd go with a full young roster. I think I'd go Kana, LM, Closer, Gumayushi, and then KIA. That would be the 5 that I would go with at this point, but it'll be interesting to see what they go with. As for Afreeca, again, a massive, massive, massive win, and the week that they desperately needed happened here. Finally, jumping into our final series of the week here, and that was Nongshim RedForce taking on KT Rolster, and what was a very good win here for Nongshim. If you haven't noticed, pretty much all of the middle-of-the-pack teams are trading wins with each other, which is very, very difficult to grade, but very, very interesting to watch for sure. There's a lot to really, really like here. My player of the series is going to go to Kellen in that bottom lane. He has been fantastic. He has been probably the best player for this Nongshim team so far in 2020. He looked unbelievable here on the unbelievable pick of Predator Thresh. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but Predator Thresh is interesting. And it kind of worked out in Game 1 going up against that Tom Kench. I don't expect to see more of it, but it was interesting that it happened. KT Rolster's draft was very, very passive. I actually really, really dislike This Game 1 draft in particular from KT, Graves, Azir, Senna, and Tahm Kench is an unbelievably passive early game, and we kind of saw that. They really had no agency, I should say, in controlling the map, and Nongshim just got, with that Predator Thresh, was able to control the entirety of the neutral area. So a lot of shout-outs here. I think Dectum is worth a shout-out. I think this bot lane especially has been very, very solid. I think they're kind of flying under the radar because Nongshim hasn't been a very flashy team, but they've definitely been the driving force of this roster. Peanut, kind of a good bounce-back game here. He did get that Kindred in Game 2, his kind of specialty pick. Didn't look nearly as good as that Olaf in Game 1, but still pretty decent. And Rich had probably his least bad game of the series, his least bad series of the year, which is good to see. If Rich can just not be a negative for this roster, we can see that this jungle bot lane duo can carry the game. So as long as Rich isn't going to be dominated in lane here, I think it's fine. My dud of the series is going to go to UCal, which is unfortunate because I just got finished praising him, but he was the worst performing member of the series here. I'm not going to put it entirely on him because he was on Azir in 2 games where he had a very passive team comp. However, at that point, just don't pick Azir. You can't pick Azir with Graves. I don't like that combination. Same with the Senna Tahm Kench. It's just a very, very weird thing to do here. I think this could have gone multiple ways. I think Doran also could have been your dud of the series here. He's had kind of a rough start to the year, just in general. But overall, as for the outlooks of these teams, again, these are 2 teams that are right in that middle of the pack, and everybody in that middle of the pack is basically the same skill level. So wins here are massive, especially 2-0 wins here. Nongshim is definitely going to look back on this and be very, very excited that they were able to get 2 victories here. But as for KT, it's not a massive loss. I think you wanted to see a lot more out of them after they had kind of been on a roll over the past few games, beating T1 and then beating DRX. To lose here to Nongshim kind of halts that momentum, but hopefully not too much to the point where they lose their playoff spot. That's going to go ahead and do it for my Week 3 review and analysis. Let's jump into the power rankings. Of course, on the left-hand side, you're going to see the updated LCK standings after Week 3, with, of course, pluses and minuses to dictate how high they climbed or how low they fell. And then my personal power rankings on the right side, we can talk about the biggest risers and fallers, but I do have a disclaimer. Like I've said multiple times throughout this episode, 4 through 7 are the same. I have them in a specific order here because I have to, because that's how power rankings work, but for all intents and purposes, all of them are the exact same rankings. So don't take anything 4 to 7 too specifically. It was honestly just kind of ordered in the way that they performed this week. But, all of these teams I have graded as pretty much the exact same skill level. So the biggest riser is going to be Afreeca, jumping from 9 to 4, up 5 spots. The biggest leap so far in the LCK. They looked very bad through their first 2 weeks and looked very, very, very good here, especially Dread in Week 3. My biggest faller of the week is going to go to DRX, falling from 4 to 7. They did pick up that win against Fredit BRION, but they honestly didn't look that convincing in the win there, and a pretty bad loss there to KT as well. Doesn't necessarily show that they're on the best trajectory, mostly because they also were losing in the fashion that they were winning earlier in the year. So not the most comforting thing. The top of the power rankings doesn't change. I still think it's Damwon, Hanwha, and Genji. Those are clearly the 3 best teams in Korea. However you order them, I think, is up to you. And then I think SANDBOX and BRION are clearly the 9th and 10th team. T1 kind of sitting in their own tier at 8th. Maybe a little bit worse in that middle of the pack, but definitely better than teams like SANDBOX and BRION. But that's going to go ahead and be it for this week. If you guys enjoyed, please go ahead and leave a like down there. It's going to go ahead and let me know that you guys are enjoying this series. And it's also, of course, going to help get it out to a few more people. If you have any different opinions than me, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below. I love having conversations with you guys. I love hearing new opinions. I know I am not the only opinion out there. But I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.